In his encounters with people again and again, we see that Jesus has a knack of finding a person's weak spot, and he works with that as he looks to find a way to bring about their transformation. Now, for Nicodemus, his weak spot is his intellect and his knowledge. Nicodemus thinks that these are actually his greatest strengths, and he's kind of tickled that he has been the one to first recognize Jesus as more than just a wacko from the backwoods. Consequently, Nicodemus is kind of baffled and more than a little taken aback by Jesus' less than enthusiastic response to his rather, for him, humble declaration of a beginning belief in Jesus as God's messenger. I think that Nicodemus expected some more affirmation, if not outright praise, for his superior insight in recognizing that Jesus is indeed a teacher sent by God. But Jesus says that as much as Nicodemus might think that he's got the inside track at understanding Jesus' identity, he really doesn't know what he's talking about. First off, that's a bit of a snub for a man of law and great learning. But Jesus isn't finished yet. He's apparently willing to tell Nicodemus what he needs to know. Now, that's like honey to a fly. Nicodemus loves knowing. He has to know. Jesus tells him how he can get this superior knowledge before Nicodemus even has to ask. What does he have to do? Well, he has to be born again. And Nicodemus cannot make sense of this. And he sputters out things like, how can, and but. And who can blame him that he's confused? Jesus doesn't apologize and clear matters up. In fact, he meets the Pharisees' literal mindedness with more frustrating metaphor. The wind blows where it will. You hear the sound of it, but you don't know where it comes from or where it goes to. So is everything born of the Spirit. John Vanier wrote this. He said, I love Nicodemus. I too come to Jesus under the cover of darkness, intrigued yet weighted with lots of buts and how cans and what ifs. And I too would have preferred concrete answers to questions regarding my life's directions rather than let go and sail away with the Spirit. We don't really know what Nicodemus's motivation is for coming to talk with Jesus. But we do know that although he's highly educated, he has a hard time understanding what it is that Jesus is trying to tell him. And I don't think he's alone. So when Jesus says to him, no one can see the kingdom of God without being born from above, and Nicodemus replies, how can anyone be born after having grown old? Can one enter a second time into the mother's womb and be born? It's clear that Nicodemus is stuck in his head. He's taking Jesus literally. And it's as if Jesus is saying to him, you know, you and all your friends at the temple are so focused on your academic pursuits with all your doctrines and your dogmas, your rules and your regulations, but you never are going to come to know me and what I am about as a result of an intellectual conversation. My way is a way of the heart, a way of the spirit, a way of the soul. Go with the flow. Let the wind blow. Let it all go. He uses the metaphor of being reborn from above as an illustration of what he's trying to say. Consider yourself like a newborn baby, learning about everything that's true that you do not yet know. Nancy Talbot, minister at Mount Seymour United Church in Vancouver, wrote this. Think about it for a minute. When a baby is in the womb, there's no instructor that arrives in the final weeks of gestation to coach that baby on how to get out of there. The mother doesn't swallow a manual for the baby to read so they'll know what to do when the time comes. You don't need to pass an IQ test before you make that first journey. In order to be born, all a baby does is to give themselves over to the process. They just let go and let nature take its course. That's why this concept of being born again and letting the wind blow where it will is such a beautiful metaphor for the spiritual life. The only way for us to get there, to get out of our heads and get into our hearts, to surrender to the process of trusting that the Spirit is at work in our lives and in our worlds, is to let go. And that the process of our being born again or renewed in our spirit is always for the sake of a greater love. When a baby comes into the world, we talk about the miracle of birth because we know that even with all the scientific understanding we might possess, in and of ourselves, we can't make that new life happen. We're not the world's ultimate creators. We're merely participants in creation. If you have given birth, or have you ever been present at a birth, you know that even though people give birth all over the world, all the time, there's still so much about the experience that's wrapped in mystery. That's why just about everyone in a labor room bursts into tears when a baby is born. They've made it safely. They're able to be held in loving arms. We begin to get to know them close up and personal. In every single way we look at it, it's a miracle. Now, there are always elements of the birthing process that are outside of our control, and even if we engineer the gender or eye or hair color or skin color of a child, there will always be aspects of his or her disposition that we just can't predict. To give birth, to be born, is to yield ourselves to the awesome wonder of life itself and to yield ourselves to the Creator. So when Jesus says, you must be born again to Nicodemus, surely he is in part saying to the man, you gotta loosen up, my friend. You've got to get out of your thoughts and let go of trying to control and understand how and why everything happens, and instead get into your heart. You've got to lighten up on all of those rules and regulations and give yourself over to the mystery of it all. Like a baby, dependent on its mother's care, you need to let go and trust that all you need will be provided for. Surely that's what Jesus was talking about when he said that in order to experience the realm of God, you had to be born from above, to be reborn, to be born again. It sounds kind of freeing, doesn't it? This invitation to begin all over again, to allow ourselves to be blown wherever the wind chooses to take us, and to allow ourselves to be led by love. A life of faith, a life in the Spirit can be like that sometimes. Even when we're old and gray, especially if we remain curious and open, we can find ourselves awakening to new realities, experiencing new insights. I don't think that we're ever too old to be born again. I also don't think that we only get one birth or rebirth in this life. I think we can be reborn again as many times over and over as we need to in this lifetime of ours. I'm pretty sure that I'm not alone in hoping that being willing to be reborn won't involve too much trauma. And yet, if I'm honest with myself, I know there are no guarantees that that will be the case. For as much as we like to talk about the beauty and wonder of a new birth or rebirth, giving birth and being born can be a very traumatic experience. There's a reason that babies come out howling. Getting squished up and twisted around from that journey from inside to out, only to arrive in a place that is nothing like the place you just left behind, well, that's frightening and disorienting. Spiritual journeys, spiritual awakenings can be like that too sometimes. They can be traumatic events. They take you from what you knew before, how you were before, and take you to someplace brand new. And that transition can be kind of uncomfortable sometimes. It certainly had to be for Jesus. And it's quite possible that this invitation to a new birth would prove traumatic for Nicodemus too. And that's because Jesus was suggesting to Nicodemus that in being born again, he wasn't just inviting him to get out of his head and into his heart, he was actually inviting him into a whole new identity. In ancient Israel, the location that you were born into and the family that you were born into made a big impact on your life. One's status and place of honor in society was almost entirely determined by one's family of origin. Nicodemus, a Pharisee, would have been born into a life of privilege. For him, the invitation to be born again, to be born from above this time, was really all about relocating his identity. It was about bearing the likeness of God instead of the likeness of his parents or even the patriarchy that he was part of. It was about claiming his identity as a child of God, and in doing so, acknowledging a new societal order, an order based on not where your mother and father came from, but one that was based on a common understanding of brotherhood and sisterhood of all humanity, one family on equal footing. For somebody like Nicodemus, being reordered and re-identified, reborn in this way would surely have involved some kind of trauma. He had a lot of status to lose. We see Nicodemus again a few more times in the gospel. He may have become a secret believer. We have reason to believe that he remained inside the system and was determined to use whatever influence that he had to protect Jesus and to support Jesus's ministry. Letting go of our place of privilege in order to level the playing field for others can be really challenging when you're the one who's being asked to give up your place at the top. Some of us will go willingly into that kind of life-altering rebirth process. And others of us, well, we'll go fighting all the way. In many ways, I think that's what's going on in Western society at this moment in history. It continues on. The Spirit continues to push us, to lead us, to make room at the table for immigrants and refugees and for our Indigenous brothers and sisters, for women, for people of color, for the poor among us, for all those who are marginalized. And there's lots of us who really don't want to give up our cushy seats at the table. We want to keep hanging on to everything that we have. Even if we are willing to go through the birthing pains to welcome a new and better world, we really, really want it to be an easy birth, not a traumatic one. But evidence would suggest that once labor begins, if we don't yield to that natural process, the experience is probably going to be a lot more painful than it needs to be. But this is good news. If you have ever opened yourself up to a spiritual journey, a journey of the heart, you know that in the end, despite all of the pain, all of the struggle, all of the doubt, that love will always have its way. It is written, by God's love, the world shall be saved. And it shall. Even if some of us admit, like newborn babies, that we have to be delivered into love's arms, kicking and screaming all the way. Amen.